I call now on Deputy Seán Kyne. I understand you're sharing your time with Deputy Seán Kyne. 5 minutes each.
5 minutes each.
Is that
yes.
agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I'd, from the outset, like to welcome the Irish Human Rights and Equality Bill and recognise that it's a key deliverable of the public sector reform plan published in 2011 in terms of streamlining our state bodies. And I'd like to acknowledge also the recent launch in November of last year, the Equality Authority and the Irish Human Rights Commission, who launched their annual report for 2013. At the time, the acting designate stated that it's a testimony to how far the process of combining the work of the two distinct organisations has progressed. I think the bill is an excellent example of the new pre-legislative scrutiny, a process by which the main themes of the bill are published and then examined in a meaningful and helpful way through engagement and consultation with the public and civil society organisations. I'd like to pay tribute to the Minister on his work on this, and also to my Oireachtas colleagues who sit on the Committee for Justice and Equality, chaired by Deputy David Stanton, who just spoke, and I think a very thought-provoking speech and a number of very valid and very welcomed comments and contributions. And that committee held substantive public meetings and heard from a wide range of interested parties before publishing a helpful report. Originally, the Irish Human Rights Commission was established under following the Good Friday Agreement, and has become the main body tasked with holding the state to account in terms of respecting human rights. Acknowledgement of the human rights enshrined in the United Nations Direct Declaration on the Human Rights, along with respect for these rights, is the main characteristic of a civilised society. It differentiates our nation and those in Europe from nations elsewhere who continue to deprive and denigrate their peoples. It has to be said that our state has not always respected and vindicated rights. There is plenty of evidence which demonstrates this, and even today we don't always get things right, and we could do certain things better. However, the crucial difference between today and the past is how we strive to uphold and vindicate the fundamental rights which are ascribed to people by virtue of being human. The 2008 budget cuts of 43% to the Equality Authority and 32% to the Irish Human Rights Commission were astounding. To be sure, all organisations had to contribute at such a time of financial instability and uncertainty, but the levels of cuts were truly disproportionate. They were also implemented at a time when the temptation to save money without due regard to human rights was at its greatest. I think it goes without saying that every TD in this House and every TD who ever sat in this House have been contacted by people who have been deprived of their rights. Indeed, the TD's often seen as the last port of call for a person seeking to have their rights upheld. In this regard, I particularly welcome the measures which will seek to instil a culture of respect for human rights across public sector organisations. I hope that in time, the necessity of appeals bodies, human rights watchdogs and others will be lessened because of this new culture. I'm aware of the concerns of some regarding the merger of the IHRC and the Equality Authority and the possible problems regarding the difference between equality and human rights. I appreciate these concerns, but I also see the overlapping functions between the two previously separate organisations, and I see an overlap between the concept of human rights and equality. If human rights are respected and vindicated fully among all citizens, then in theory inequality is not an issue and should not arise. Of course, everyday life is more complex than this. However, I believe that the work of both the IHRC and the Equality Authority through the new Human Rights and Equality Commission can help foster a culture which delivers greater respect for human rights. On the subject of delivery, I welcome the Minister's statement that the new IHREC will unequivocally keep faith with the Paris Principles, the peer-reviewed accreditation for human rights commissions. I would hope and urge that in the review of the new organisations in terms of the Paris Principles, that any shortcomings that are identified which may affect the current A status which the IHRC has will be addressed without delay. One of the main principles of the Paris Principles concerns adequate human and financial resources. While a sound legislative basis and a strong commitment at political level are essential, so too are resources. The Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission can only be as effective as possible as long as it is properly resourced. And in this context, I believe there will always be tension and a possible problem when the organisation tasked with holding the government to account on human rights and equality issues is financially dependent on that government. And I think Section 26, which covers the funding, states that a commitment that such funding will be reasonably sufficient to allow the Commission to fulfil its mandate. And that in straitened times, there would be concerns that that budget would be greatly reduced, as I outlined earlier in 2008 cuts. I think we should examine, finally, ways of linking the financing of the new IHRAC with an independent measure. For example, the funding would always be a percentage of GDP or GNP, or would never fall below a certain minimum threshold. And it is simply essential that the new IHRAC receives the proper resources so it can carry out its very important work. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Deputy Kyne.